Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
On popular demand today, because so many of you have asked that we declutter what's happening between Armenia and Azerbaijan. I am talking about that issue. Although, mind you, the Chinese threw googly at us just this morning when they spoke to the Hindustan Times correspondent there, Sutirtha Patranovis, and told him that they would like India to find a modus vivendi in Ladakh along what they call as their 1959 claim line. So I had thought that I will talk about that because that's an ongoing problem closer home. But when there is popular opinion, all of you readers, viewers matter a lot more to us than the Chinese. So the Chinese take the back seat. So maybe 1959 claim line tomorrow. But today we talk about Azerbaijan and Armenia. And there is also a little nostalgic reason. And what is nostalgic region? In the winter of 1989-1990, that is December, January of 89 and 1990, I was traveling in the Soviet bloc as the Soviet bloc was unraveling and the first signs of trouble were coming in. And the first bits of separatism were coming in, because you remember Soviet Union it did consist of many different republics which notionally had the right to secede, if you could ask Stalin for such a favor, but which had these supposedly autonomous republics, and many of these were now chafing, trading at the leash, or wanted independence or wanted to break away. And two of those at that point very prominently were Armenia and Azerbaijan, the two countries that are now fighting. So in fact, I'm sharing the story I wrote, the cover story in India Today, then from Moscow on the Armenia-Azerbaijan problem and Nagorno-Karabakh is found somewhere there. You will find a mention. It is also the beauty of the Soviet system, that just as in Delhi you might have an Assam Bhavan and a Punjab Bhavan and a Haryana Bhavan and a Tamil Nadu Bhavan and an Andhra Bhavan, etc. In Moscow those days, each one of these republics had an embassy. So while it may have been a Bhavan, it was called an embassy. So I also do remember doing many chakkars between the Azerbaijani embassy and the Armenian embassy, and it was in the Azerbaijani embassy that I ran into Garry Kasparov, the great chess champion. He was in his late 20s or mid-20s, late mid-20s at that time. He had become a democracy activist. So if you scroll through this India Today story, of which I have given you a link, you will also find a picture and a quote from Garry Kasparov. Now, nostalgia apart, what is Armenia? What is Azerbaijan? What are they fighting over? And why should anybody bother? Now look at the map of the world. Once again, if you look, when we focus in terms of Indian interest, we look at China, we look at Pakistan, we look at Bangladesh, we look at the Indian Ocean, Arabian Sea, and even when we want to look beyond our immediate neighbors, say Pakistan, then we look at the Gulf, and after the Gulf we look at the Western world and go right up to America. Or when we look beyond China, then we look east, we look at Japan, Indonesia, Singapore, the ASEAN countries, Korea, etc., etc., etc. But there is a part of the world which somehow we think of as not so significant. And the reason we think so is that we've been conditioned over the decades to see that part as the Soviet bloc or as the Soviet Union. That is the old Soviet Union. Now, many of those countries have come in our consciousness because they are next to Afghanistan. They've also developed closer relations with India. These are the countries that the Americans sometimes call the stans, that is Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, etc., etc., etc. But there is one Muslim country there, a sizable Muslim country with about 1 crore of population called Azerbaijan, which does not get that much of a mention, although Azerbaijan has a very large storehouse of oil and gas, more gas than oil. And it is also positioned very strategically between Georgia, Russia and Russia, the North Caucasus region. Azerbaijan itself comes into the South Caucasus region, and Iran and Turkey. Now, next to Azerbaijan is also the Republic of Armenia. Now, if you look at Azerbaijan and Armenia, Azerbaijan is about 3 times Armenia's size and area. One is about 30,000 square kilometers, one is about 85,000 square kilometers. So, if I take my home state of Haryana as a measure for comparison, then you can say that Armenia is about 2/3 the size of Haryana. Azerbaijan is about twice the size of Haryana, and in between them is a landlocked region called Nagorno-Karabakh, which is an area of 4,400 square kilometers, give or take a little. So once again, applying the Haryana test to it, it is about 1/10 of Haryana. And what is the population of this area called Nagorno-Karabakh? It is only 1.5 lakhs. So there is Armenia, about 30 lakh people, and about 30,000 square kilometers. There is Azerbaijan, about 85,000 square kilometers, and about 1 crore of people. In between them, this tiny territory of Nagorno-Karabakh, which is now also called Republic of Artsakh. And how that happened is a fascinating story also, and I will talk about it. So that territory is what these two countries are fighting over, and they've been fighting over this territory for a very long time, because very often these disputes lie in geography or ethnicity or religion or history. But there are some occasions when these disputes lie in all four, that is history, geography, ethnicity and religion, which is the case now. If you look at religion, for example, Armenia is almost 100% Christian Orthodox. Azerbaijan, on the other hand, is almost 100%, 96% Muslim, 85% of whom are Shia Muslims. So we had mentioned Azerbaijan also in our Kartak letter on Shia-Sunni dispute in Pakistan. The fact is that after Iran, this has the highest Shia majority of any country of 85%. Iraq and Bahrain, etc. come after that. So this is in a way the second largest Shia majority country in the world, has a large border with Iran. Once again, if you look at the map of the world, Armenia is fully landlocked, but on one side of Armenia there is Azerbaijan opening out to the Caspian Sea on one side, and the Black Sea on the other, both of which I think at least a non-vegetarian should know as great sources of caviar for the whole world markets. Now, it is in this situation that this little enclave is stuck, and there is a history to this. History to this is that the Soviets or the Russians acquired this real estate, Azerbaijan and Armenia, in around 1919. That is when the map of the world was being redrawn after the First World War. And winners decided to divide this, that. And the Tsarist empire had declined in Russia, but the new communist empire was being built, and they were then acquiring these republics from all over and expanding. So Azerbaijan and Armenia became a part of the Soviet empire at that time. Now, it was in the beginning, in the same period of upheaval of the First World War and the Spanish flu pandemic. In that mess, the declining Turkish power or the declining Ottoman power, which was losing power in other parts of Europe and was being pushed out, they decided to push in towards Armenia. And it was in that process that what is recorded as the first major genocide of the 20th century took place. In 1915, the great massacre of the Armenians took place by the Turks. At that point, more than 150,000 people Armenians were killed. So you can imagine what the population of Armenians may have been at that time. Of that also, so many were killed, 150,000. It was a huge massacre at that time, and Armenians have been demanding an apology and acknowledgement from the Turks. Turks refused to give it. Turks are Muslim, and now under Erdogan, the Turks are obviously leaning towards Azerbaijan. So the Armenians think that it is the Turks who are instigating Azerbaijan, and they are on that side. For Turkey, there is a reason for anxieties also, because just as in Ottoman times, because Erdogan looks at life in terms of those times of Ottoman glory, Russia was an enemy then. Russia is seen as an adversary now, because Turkish and Russian interests are clashing in Syria, in Libya, and now it seems possibly in Armenia, Azerbaijan as well. Now, this little enclave of Nagorno-Karabakh. What is Nagorno-Karabakh? Very interesting etymology, and there are many interpretations, but generally the most accurate one is one that I find in James Palmer's article in Foreign Policy magazine, which I am sharing with you. This is mountainous black garden, because it's bleak, it's dark, it's mountainous. It's not high like Himalayas or Ladakh, but it is heavily mountainous, very sparsely populated. Just 150,000 people in an area 1/10 the size of Haryana, which has nearly 3 crore people now. Now this region has a problem, a complication of both religion and ethnicity. Historically, this territory has been controlled by Azerbaijan. Even now, internationally, generally, this will be seen to be a territory under Azerbaijan. At the same time, because its people are predominantly Armenian and Christian, they've never liked being with Azerbaijan, so they never accepted it. Now this was all right when the Soviets were there, because the Soviet Danda kept everybody in control, everybody behaved, they gave some powers to Azerbaijan, some powers to Armenia. Nagorno-Karabakh was there, they called it like a district, an oblast, but let it be. Also in a country which was essentially and compulsively atheist. It didn't matter so much on the ground whether you were Christian or you were Muslim, because all religiosity was kept suppressed. But once the Russian controlled loosened, which is the time I first visited the area in 89-90, then the first thing that reared its head was God, religion. Suddenly Russians became Christian Orthodox, and many of these Islamic populations in the stans, as these are called, Azerbaijan, and that's when Chechnya and other problems also came up in the course of time. So the first problem to rise was Armenia and Azerbaijan. Both pushed for independence, both also pushed against each other, and when that happened, then the immediate question was, who owns Nagorno-Karabakh? So the Soviet Empire declined. Initially, the Soviets brought about some kind of an uneasy peace. There was a fight. People were killed on both sides. So there were effectively 1.5 referendums in Nagorno-Karabakh in 1991. In the first one, they said they want to be independent. But soon enough, because nobody seemed to like that, none of the two neighbors, both pushed in. Then they said they'd rather join Armenia because of their religious and ethnic linkages there. And when that happened, a lot of the remaining Azeris Muslims were also driven out. In fact, the first big ethnic cleansing, as we know, of our times took place there. Nearly 1 million people were expelled from Nagorno-Karabakh and the entire region, from Armenia and from Azerbaijan. Of this, about 70% were Azeris and about 30% were Armenians. So if you look at the population today of Armenia and Azerbaijan, which are neighboring countries, you will find almost no Azeris in Armenia and almost no Armenians in Azerbaijan. Armenians actually have been an old immigrant population. They've also suffered many excesses and many atrocities. So they've been spreading out across the world. In fact, even in India, there's been a vibrant Armenian community, particularly in Kolkata. So this is an aside. In fact, it was the Armenian community that built Kolkata's first church, it seems, in 1734. It's called Church of the Holy Nazareth, on the Armenian Church of the Holy Nazareth on Brabourne Road still exists, and there is also an Armenian college. One of the first great classical singers, Thumri Dadra singers of India, Gauhar Jan was actually Armenian. She was born as Angelina Yovard in 1873 in India and was then taken to Banaras to learn Indian classical music. It so happens that she was also the first singer in India to feature in a recording on a gramophone in 1902. So once again, Gauhar Jan was an Armenian. Now, James Palmer calls what is happening in Armenia and Azerbaijan as the great forgotten conflict of Soviet breakup. How it happened, I told you, between 1902 and 94, a big war took place between the two, which nobody took notice of because all of us had other distractions because the Cold War had ended. Each one of us as countries had their own problems. So who bothered about this? But nearly 20,000 people died in that war. And this was a war between two small populations. So you can see how intense that war is. The other interesting thing is in that war, who did better? So although Azerbaijan is thrice the size of Armenia in population and in area, it was the Armenians who did better. Why? Because their army was more professional, it was better run, it was more committed and more disciplined. Azeris, on the other hand, had inherited the old Soviet system of conscription and had kept it that way. And this was a funny war. This was a very funny war in which sometimes you didn't know who was fighting whom. And I'll explain to you what that means. Who was fighting whom means that very often both sides had mercenaries fighting for them. So there were occasions when Russian mercenaries, because a large, great Soviet army was now unraveling, the former Soviet army soldiers were now fighting as mercenaries on either side. And there were many cases where people who were fighting on one side switched overnight to the other side. So nobody knew who was fighting whom. All of this between these two small nations with two small populations. And this in fact got so ridiculous that after having been suspended for almost 3 years, the first flight between Yerevan, which is the capital of Armenia, and Baku, which is the capital of Azerbaijan, took place in the first flight took place in 1993. And you know why? That's because a famous or infamous Armenian mobster or mafioso who held sway in the entire region. Sometimes when you see these countries in conflict, you might find that there is a bad guy who has power on both sides. So this mobster had power on both sides, and you know there is honor among thieves. He had died, and Azeri mobsters also, his Azeri followers, wanted to come and pay tribute to him at his funeral. So to bring him and take them back in the middle of the war, a flight was run between Baku and Yerevan. It was in that madness then that the Russian moved in, the Iranians moved in, everybody moved in and brought about some kind of a truce. So there was a truce, but it was an uneasy truce because both countries had not made peace with each other, and Nagorno-Karabakh was still an issue because by this time it looked like Armenia was much more in control of that region than Azerbaijan, although notionally this was a part of Azerbaijan. In the course of time, Armenia also figured that it would be unsustainable if they just said annexed Nagorno-Karabakh. So they declared it into some kind of a republic. That was called Republic of Artsakh, which has its own government, but that's notional. That's, in a way, it's not a very apt comparison, but it's the closest that I can come up with at the top of my head. It was a bit like the Bantustan that the apartheid regime in South Africa had set up around itself. So controlled by Armenia, but supposedly a republic. Now, this uneasy peace continued between Armenia and Azerbaijan, but how strong the bitterness was, I will tell you. Now, even during the wars, Indians and Pakistanis have been together. Sunil Gavaskar writes in his autobiography how he was sharing a room with Zahir Abbas, Pakistan's Zahir Abbas, in Australia because they were both members of the rest of the world team playing against Australia when the 1971 war was going on. And there were concerns, particularly in Zahir Abbas's mind, about bombings in Karachi. and yet they shared a room and they played together. But this is much more bitter. So there is a case that James Palmer quotes, an incident in 2004. Now Armenians and Azerbaijanis were both sending their armed forces officers out for training, also to Budapest, where NATO ran a training program. So on one of those training programs, a captain, an Azeri officer called Ramil Safarov, got up in the middle of the night. He axed one of the Armenian officers to death, nearly killed another one, was arrested, was given a life sentence. 8 years later, after it served 8 years of life sentence, Azerbaijan, as part of some treaty, some deal, got the Hungarians to release him on the promise that he will complete the rest of his sentence in an Azeri jail. But what happened? Soon as he came back, he was pardoned, he was promoted to major, he was given a new apartment and rewarded. In fact, the official statement of the Azerbaijani government was that he was thrown in jail in Hungary after he defended his country's honor and dignity of its people. So this is how bitter this relationship is. Now, Azerbaijanis have tried fighting, and even now it looks like they are the ones who might have started it. But if you look at all the data that's coming in, it looks like that Azerbaijanis, even though they are a stronger power, in the oil boom, they've spent a lot of money buying new equipment, weaponry for their armed forces. They are still doing poorly, and there are more casualties being suffered on their side, particularly their tracked vehicles, their tanks, etc., etc. That's one, because Armenians are more disciplined. Also because Armenians are on the heights, so they have a terrain advantage, and the Azerbaijanis have a problem there. So that's where we stand now. The two big tigers there are Russia and Turkey, because both can determine where this situation will go. Half a tiger there also is Iran, partly because 85% of the population, Muslim population in Azerbaijan is Shia, and also because they have a border. They have a kind of maritime border, but also a land border, both with Turkey and with Azerbaijan, and in fact with Armenia as well. So they are also an important country there, with slightly less leverage than the rest. And strategically, this region is very important, because all of Europe has waited all this while to be liberated from the tyranny of Russian gas pipelines coming into them and sustaining them, because Europe desperately needs that gas. Now, because Azerbaijan has a lot of gas, Azerbaijan has built pipelines that come straight into Turkey and go into Europe. They don't have to go through Russia. So everybody is worried, because pipelines also pass right through this conflicted region. So in this witch's brew of ethnicity, religion, geography, history, you also throw in a little bit of strategic interest and that final thing that you need to light any fire, which is oil and gas.